The question is, do you believe aliens exist? Because today we're talking about Anaximander, the philosopher of the infinite and boundless. Anaximander was a philosopher almost 2,600 years ago. And what he has to do with sort of alien speculation is because he paved the way for this by introducing important concepts like space, many worlds, a singularity, evolution, and a lot more. So today we're going to be looking at the thoughts of Anaximander, how he brought into the realm of thought all these enormously important cosmological ideas, and what it has to do with Hyperion. We're also going to be talking a bit on Hyperianism stance on extraterrestrial life, as well as network minds, because we're going to see this is all interrelated, in addition to what the purpose of planets are, etc. But we're really going to be looking at the thoughts of this extremely important philosopher, Anaximander, who is very important to Hyperianism and bringing forth he was one of the very first individuals to use the PSR, the principle of sufficient reason. So in addition to this and prototypes of evolution, space, singularity, many worlds, all this, he is an incredibly important philosopher, really bringing forth conceptual thinking with the idea of the Apeiron, the boundless or the infinite. It's going to be a good one. So we're going to get started. I want to remind you guys that anyone who supports on Patreon or Tier 2 as a YouTube member gets access to my live stream notes, my notes for this video and many of my other videos, secret weekly live streams, and our hidden Discord, the Citadel. All right, so here we go. Now, as I said, Anaximander is a very important individual who really paved the way for introducing concepts that would ultimately lead to speculation about extraterrestrial life. For example, he introduced the idea of space. He introduced the idea of many worlds. He introduced the idea of a singularity, evolution, and a lot more. So we're going to be taking a look at specifically these ideas, how they relate to Hyperianism, and also Hyperianism's view on extraterrestrial life, planets, and network minds. So Anaximander held crucial ideas, as I said, to evolution, space, many worlds, a singularity, the infinite, and more. Now, because he believed in many worlds, this leads to the speculation of life not confined to this planet. So rather than thinking of something as infinite, it's better to think of something as boundless. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we're going to find that in the pre-Socratic philosophy, in ancient philosophy, philosophers, the pre-Socratics, were interested in finding what's known as the Arche, and that is the fundamental principle of existence, the thing that reality can be reduced to that explains everything. So if that sounds a little vague or abstract, it's going to make more sense as we go along. Now, Anaximander was the student of Thales, and Thales is recognized as being the first philosopher. And I get a lot of people who go, oh, well, Thales wasn't the first philosopher. There was this person and this person and this person. And they'll list perhaps like ancient Egyptians or different prophets or things like this. But the idea is, when we say that Thales is the first philosopher, we are not saying that Thales was the first person to ever conceive of theories of reality, theories of existence, or theories of the universe. Rather, Thales was the first person that we know of that is recorded to say that we should understand reality and existence based on reason, rather than appealing to the gods or some sort of miraculous power or what have you. So that's what it means, and that's why Thales is given that title of being the first known individual, because it's more than just having a theory of existence. It's having a theory of existence that is in accord with understanding reality in a rational way, instead of, a metaphorical story like they do in Gnosticism. That's why Gnostics isn't considered philosophy, because Gnosticism is a story. There's philosophy embedded within it. There's powerful Platonic philosophy embedded within it. But ultimately, it's a story because, you have the one which generated Sophia, who generated Yaldabaoth, who created the material world and trapped souls in it. Like, this is not rational. There are rational ideas underneath it and conveyed through story, but ultimately, anyway, I think you get what I'm saying. I just want to make that distinction because I get a lot of people who object when you say that Thales was the first known philosopher. But that's what it means. That's specifically what it means. Not the first person to have some kind of theory of existence. The first person to emphasize the importance of reason. And there might have been someone before him. There probably was, but this is the first known individual that we know about. So I'm going to be reading as well different quotes from different websites, etc., about Thales and Anaximander. And as I said, these lecture notes will be available for those who support on Patreon, and I'll have all the different links where this information comes from that you can check out for yourself. But anyway, so Anaximander was one of Thales' first students. Perhaps the very first. Now, Pythagoras was one of his later students, and Pythagoras was also taught by Anaximander. So this is really important because we're going to see that, Thales is important just because he's the first philosopher that we know of, but Anaximander and Pythagoras are integral to the foundations of Hyperianism, because Pythagoras was the one who said that reality is mathematical, that reality is mathematics, that number rules the universe. And Anaximander brought in the idea of the boundless, the Apeiron, the infinite, and ideas like space and the singularity and the first known use of the principle of sufficient reason. Anaximander is extremely intelligent. And as we can see, this is really the blossoming and the blooming of intelligent, rational thought here, because we have Thales, the first philosopher, and then Anaximander being one of the very first students of Thales, and then Pythagoras being a student of Thales and Anaximander. And we know that both Thales and Pythagoras were influenced by Egyptian ideas and things like that. So very, very cool. So Thales' core belief, which he passed on to Anaximander, and this is going to all make sense at the end, where I talk about Hyperianism's view on extraterrestrial life and network minds, because it all involves the ideas set out by Anaximander. So this is what I mean by saying that he's the first alien philosopher, is that he put forth the ideas that are necessary to have an understanding of what these things are. You need many worlds, you need space, you need singularities, you need the infinite, you need the boundless, you need all of these ingredients to truly understand what's going on. So, Thales' core belief, which he passed to Anaximander, was that rational explanations, rather than the ancient Greek gods, should be used to account for phenomena. That's what I was just going on about. So, Anaximander, in his evolution, all right, I forgot to mention evolution being a critical ingredient, because Anaximander was one of the very first to conceive of this idea of a kind of sort of evolution as well. So, reading an excerpt here, Anaximander looked at the life around him and came to the conclusion that it must have evolved from other life forms. And this is going to be critical when we talk about alien life. Evolution is, obviously at the heart of all this. So he believed that the world's first life forms originated in the world's wetter environments, then evolved into more advanced forms and spread to drier places. He believed humans could not have appeared on Earth in their current form. His reasoning was that the young of some animals can look after themselves from the time that they're born. Human children, however, need to be taken care of for many years. If this had always been the case, humans could not have survived. Anaximander speculated that our ancestor may have been a fish-like creature, which gave birth to humans when they had reached an age when they could survive without parents to look after them. So it's really interesting that he had this sort of proto-idea of evolution, whereas life originated in wetter environments and then graduated to drier environments, and that humanity came or evolved from fish-like creatures at a certain point. Now again, this might seem like a primitive idea, but think about this. This was 2,600 years ago when, people were still believing in quite insane ideas. I mean, people still do today, but you get where I'm saying. This is some advanced thinking, period. So evolution is something that's going to be very important for understanding. Now, Anaximander said that the Arche was the boundless or the infinite. So what is the Arche? The Arche is, all the pre-Socratic philosophers were interested in what the Arche is. Now the Arche is the fundamental principle of the universe. What makes the universe possible? So for example, Thales thought that water was the Arche. He thought that ultimately everything was different forms of water, that water was the fundamental substance. Now you have another philosopher like Heraclitus. Heraclitus thought that fire was the Arche. The reason why Heraclitus thought that fire was the Arche was because he looked at the world around him and he saw that everything was changing, everything was moving. He's famous for saying you can never step in the same river twice. So he looked around him and he saw this world of constant change and constant flux. And he said that fire was the ultimate principle of the universe. And you can even get a sense for this because when you look at a flickering flame, it's constantly moving, constantly in motion. But you also have to remember that these pre-Socratic philosophers were at a time when vocabulary was very limited. So when Heraclitus, for example, said that fire was the Arche, or the primary substance of existence, what he really was meaning and intending by this was energy. But guess what? They didn't have a word for energy. So imagine if you were trying to describe the principle of energy, but you're limited to the descriptions that you have at the time that you were born. I mean, fire is a really good candidate. So you can see where at some level, it can seem like these pre-Socratic philosophers had primitive ideas. But when you really look into them, you see that they are actually extremely advanced ideas, very powerful, especially for the time that they were born in and using the limited language that they had at their disposal. So anyway, my point is, this is what the Arche is. It's this fundamental principle of existence. And so Thales thought it was water. Heraclitus thought it was fire. You had Empedocles who thought it was the four elements, that it was four. You had all these different philosophers putting forth their idea of what the Arche was. Pythagoras said the Arche was mathematics. In Hyperianism, the Arche is reason, mathematics, mind. These are all the same thing. I could say the Arche is mathematics, and that would be correct. I could say the Arche is reason, and that would be correct. I could say the Arche is mind, and that would be correct, because these are all just different words for the same thing. You see how Heraclitus had a difficulty, like, oh man, what word am I going to use? Fire is the best one for it. Sort of the same idea here in Hyperianism. There is this thing that is the fundamental thing of existence, and we have a limited vocabulary. The best thing that we can use to describe this is reason, mathematics, and mind. These things are the same thing and are the fundamental thing of existence. So, what did Anaximander say was the Arche? Anaximander said that the Arche was the boundless, or the infinite. Now in Hyperianism, we could absolutely agree with this, because the Arche is the boundless. It is the infinite. And the way to think about this better is when you think of infinite, instead of thinking an unending chain, some sort of unending linear sequence, such as 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 ... A better way to think of it is all that is and can be. That's a better way to really encapsulate the essence of what Anaximander meant and how we view it in Hyperianism. It is all that is and can possibly be. That is what the boundless or the infinite is. And so in our conception of reality, the Apeiron, all that is and can possibly be, is reason, is math, and is mind. It's life, it's existence. Again, reason is existence, is life, is mind, is the Apeiron. So Anaximander, whereas Thales said it was water, Heraclitus said it was fire, Anaximander said it's the Apeiron, which could be translated as the boundless or the infinite. Or again, I recommend thinking of it as the all that is and can be. So reading here, Anaximander is said to have identified the Arche with the boundless or the unlimited, Greek for Apeiron. That is, that which has no boundaries. The suggestion, however, is almost irresistible that Greek philosophy, by making the boundless into the principle of all things, has started on a high level of abstraction. So again, this is a really interesting idea here. Here's another big, fantastic idea that Anaximander brought to the table. Whereas if Thales is saying water is the primary substance, or Heraclitus is saying fire, Anaximander brought forth this idea that's very abstract. It's the boundless, the infinite, the Apeiron. It's not something that you can point to and go, oh, it's like that. It's like water, or you know, light a candle. It's like fire. Now here we had Anaximander really delving deeply into the idea of abstraction and concepts and ideas. No, it's not water, it's not fire, it's not earth, it's not wind. It's the Apeiron. It's the boundless. It's the all that there is, the unlimited. Really powerful stuff here. And emphasizing this, how, you know, remember, this is the very beginning of rational, true, pure rational thought. So Aristotle reports a curious argument, which probably goes back to Anaximander, in which it is argued that the boundless has no origin because it is itself the origin. And again, this is I can't stress enough how beautiful this is. It sounds simple, but it's beautiful. The boundless, the Apeiron, is that which has no origin because it is the origin. And this is a precursor to the idea of aseity, or being self-caused, or existence being its essence, in that what it is existence. You don't have to ask, how does something exist if it is existence per se, because you're already using existence as a description, if that makes sense. I'll explain more as we go forward. So here's the argument here that Aristotle put forward that goes back to Anaximander. Everything has an origin, and again, this is all extremely important to what we're going to be talking about network minds, and you know, people are probably like, well, why aren't you talking about the aliens? Well, here's the idea. We want to be rational. We want to understand the truth of reality. And you can't understand what actually exists without understanding the necessary ingredients for the existence of these things. You have to understand the Apeiron. You have to understand the boundless. You have to understand evolution. You have to understand singularity. So you have to understand all these. You have to understand many worlds to be able to truly grasp what's going on. So the argument is everything has an origin or is an origin. The boundless has no origin, for then it would have a limit. Moreover, it is both unborn and immortal, being a kind of origin. For that which has become has also. necessarily an end, and there is a termination to every process of destruction. So basically what's saying is that everything has an origin, or it is an origin. The boundless, the Apeiron, has no origin, because if it had an origin, it would have a limit. And if it had a limit, it wouldn't be the boundless. If it had a beginning, it would have an end. If it had some kind of bound, like a beginning or an end, it would not be the boundless. The Apeiron is not something that has a beginning or an origin. The Apeiron is that which is the originator. It is the origin from which everything else depends upon it. And the correlate to this in Hyperianism is the idea of reason. Reason in Hyperianism is the Apeiron, or the boundless, because nothing can exist apart from reason. And to really be able to grasp this and understand this is that it is impossible to imagine there not being reason. Because if there was not reason, what would there be? This is a really important thing to understand here. If you try to imagine that reason doesn't exist, right? Try to imagine that for a minute. Try to imagine that reason doesn't exist. If you imagine nothingness, that's wrong. Because nothingness is in accord with reason. So if you try and imagine reason not existing, and even if you imagine a total void, a total absolute nothing, that is not the absence of reason. Even in that void and nothingness, reason still exists. And here's how you know this to be true. Because if reason did not exist, there would not be a void or nothingness. There would be absurdity. There can only be nothingness because nothingness is stable. And by asserting that there is nothingness, you already assert the existence of reason. If you get rid of reason, there isn't nothing. There is only absurdity. And you can't imagine absurdity because it's literally impossible. It's something that you can't imagine because it does not exist. It can't exist. It's not possible for it to exist. I can try and give you examples of trying to imagine absurdity, like just dragons popping in and out of existence and complete chaos. And then like there's just imagine total chaos with no things popping in and out of existence and black holes opening up and closing, worlds starting and ending. That's kind of a way to kind of grasp the idea of absurdity, but that's not even absurdity. Because absurdity is literally impossible. It's unimaginable because it can't exist. So the idea that I'm trying to get to you is that reason necessarily has existence because it is the only thing that can possibly exist. Because if it didn't exist, there would be absurdity, but absurdity isn't possible. So reason, rational structure, is existence. It's the only thing that can exist. Its existence is mandatory. It can't not exist because if it were removed, the floodgates of absurdity would open, but that is literally impossible. I'm repeating myself a lot because this is very abstract thinking and it's very difficult for people to grasp this usually. I'm not saying you can't or anything like that. There's just a lot of different people that watch my channel. Some people are very familiar with these things. Some people it's their first time. And I'm repeating it a lot because it's very important. So again, just to reiterate, if you're trying to go back and imagine total nothingness, a complete void, in your conception of that, you have already introduced reason. Because without reason, it wouldn't be total nothingness, it would be absurdity. But absurdity is not possible. It's literally impossible. Therefore, reason must exist. It's rationally provable. This is provable. This is not speculation. This is, oh, it might be this way. No, this is clearly and 100% provable. Tight. You can't get more airtight than this. The only thing is, can you, not you, but a person watching this, understand the proof? Because it's absolutely provable and it's an airtight proof. But, it's up to a person watching this whether they can understand the proof or not. So absurdity is a literal impossibility. Reason is the only thing that can and must exist. So let's continue, because this is very important, because this argument is sort of a similar, this is a more sophisticated one, but this is sort of what Anaximander was getting at with the Apeiron, being that it is the boundless, it is without origin because it is the origin, and it is that always is. So the Greeks were familiar with the idea of the immortal Homeric gods. Anaximander added two distinctive features to the concept of divinity. His boundless, Apeiron, is an impersonal something. It is not only immortal, but also unborn. So do you see how he's going so much further than the idea of the Homeric Greek gods? That this boundless Apeiron, it's an impersonal thing. It's this force, and it's never been born, which is very different from, you know, like Dionysus, who came from the leg of Zeus, and you get the idea. So, however, perhaps not Anaximander, but Thales should be credited with this new idea. Diogenes Laertius ascribed to Thales the aphorism, "What is the divine? That which has no origin and no end." Same thing in Hyperianism. That's why we know that we are divine, because we are that which has no origin and no end. Because remember, reason is all that there is and all that can be. Literally. When people ask, how can reason exist? That's sort of the wrong question. It's that reason is existence. Might sound subtle, but it's different. Reason is existence, and all that is and can exist. And we exist, and we are it. Now, it's really important to remember that this can sound kind of maybe dry and mechanical. Oh, reason is the only, that sounds really boring. What do you mean reason is the only thing that exists? But remember, it's not reason as you might think that it is, or reason that is colloquially understood as. It's that we don't really have the word to grasp its totality and magnificence. Just like Heraclitus had to use the word fire, we use the word reason because it is reason, but it's life, it's living reason, it's living life, reason, existence, mathematics, mind, all these things together as one. So it's really important to remember that. Never think that, oh, it's this really dry, mechanical view of reality. No. It is pulsing with life, purpose, meaning, divinity. It is all that there is. It is everything that is. All, you get what I mean? It's not this bland, dry, mechanical sort of idea of, oh, like boring logic and syllogisms. And I mean, it has to do with that. But it's not just form, it's filled with content. It's pulsing with life. The pulse of existence beats through it. So we have all these interesting ideas that Anaximander is putting forth. So we have this idea of evolution. We have this idea of the Apeiron, the boundless or the infinite, that which is without origin. Now we have this idea of a singularity. So the boundless, the Apeiron, seems to have played a role in Anaximander's account of the origin of the cosmos. Its eternal movement is said to have caused the origin of the heavens. Elsewhere, it is said that all the heavens and the worlds within them have sprung from some boundless nature. A part of this process is described in rather poetic language, full of images such as a germ pregnant with hot and cold was separated or separated itself off from the eternal, whereupon out of this germ a sphere of fire grew around the vapor that surrounds the earth like a bark around a tree. And continuing here, I want to get to this, super important. But Anaximander did not believe the universe he saw had always existed. Remember, the Apeiron is not the universe, being the physical universe. Rather, the physical universe is what comes from the Apeiron. Not only do we have this idea of a singularity emerging, but a prototypical idea of the Big Bang in a certain way. I mean, not exactly, but you can see where it's getting close. So he said it had grown, that the universe had grown from a seed, a primordial substance called Apeiron. The Apeiron was infinite and could not be created or destroyed. Everything we can sense in the universe has grown from it. You see this beautiful idea of a seed and everything coming forth from it. Again, if you do not have the words that we have today, they did not have the word singularity. And as we know, singularity is what starts as the origin of the Big Bang. There was a singularity, and from that singularity sprung forth the Big Bang, which gave rise to the universe as we know it. Now, how would you possibly describe that if you didn't have these words? Seed seems like a pretty good description. That's what you would come to. That's what you would use. And so you can see that he imagined the Apeiron as this seed, the origin of everything, pregnant with hot and cold opposites that separated itself off from the eternal, and eventually this became manifestation of the physical universe. Very smart stuff here. Again, this is very similar to Hyperianism, in that in Hyperianism, reality exists as a singularity of mind, in that that which exists fundamentally is not a domain of space or time or matter. It is a domain of pure mind and exists as a singularity, a domain of mind, right? So what preceded the Big Bang? It wasn't void, it was mind. It was a domain of mind. So the idea here is, again, in Hyperianism, you have reason, which is exemplified in the language of mathematics. So basically, reason and mathematics are synonymous, but remember, it's alive, it's frequency as well. So we have reality as this living structure of reason, and then we sort of use the notation of mathematics to label how that reason is structured and operates. So you have existence. You just have pure existence that is reason, that is this rational structure. To put it even more succinctly, it is the only thing that can be. It is the only thing that can be. Now, for example, absurdity can't be. You see the difference? Absurdity cannot be. It is impossible. Reason is possible. And so it is. So it's a subtle argument, but powerful and airtight. I will put this together in a better form. But for now, the idea here is that we have this structure that must be and can be, and it is all that is, and this is life and existence as rational life and existence. Now, we want to figure out how this thing works. So what can we do? We can use the notation of mathematics to begin to label its structure and how it works. So in the language of mathematics, it is equivalent to the concept of zero. So we can label this thing that is as zero. The singularity is also a zero. And the difference here is that a zero can contain everything within it, all positive and negatives. So within this zero, within a zero, you can have +1 and -1 and +2 and -2. You can have the entirety of all of mathematics contained within this zero, this singularity. And this is what Anaximander is getting at when he's saying that this germ or this seed contains hot and cold opposites that begin to separate off from each other and form the universe. So in Hyperianism, you have 0, which is the container of infinite mathematics, that then begin to arrange themselves in certain patterns, asymmetrical rather than symmetrical, which gives birth and manifests into the physical world of space-time. I'm going to try and go faster because we need to talk about things here, and there's so much you can say. There's so much you can say about this. But time is finite, and we must persevere and continue. So we have all these ideas. We have singularities, we have evolution, we have the Apeiron, the boundless. We have now on the Earth. So this is important because this is so 2,600 years ago, again, reading from an excerpt, 2,600 years ago, Anaximander became the first person in recorded history to recognize that the Earth exists as a solitary body, which doesn't need to rest on top of anything else. Fascinated by the structure of the Earth, he produced one of the first ever maps of the world. So this again was a great idea and revolutionary idea in that he was the first person in recorded history to recognize that the Earth exists as a single body and does not need to rest on top of anything. So you can see how this is really the introduction of the idea of space, because you have a hanging universe or Earth rather, and it's not supported by anything. And so now we bring in the introduction to the precursor to the idea of space. This, and I can't emphasize enough how brilliant Anaximander was. Think about these fundamental ideas that there were no words for, that there was no, very difficult to communicate in a world where everyone believed in gods and monsters, bringing forth these very powerful ideas. And here's something that's very important idea, especially with regard to Hyperianism, is that Anaximander is the first known use of the principle of sufficient reason. And the principle of sufficient reason is fundamental to Hyperianism. I still have to do many more videos about this, but the principle of sufficient reason is essentially a principle given by Leibniz, one of the founders of calculus, discoverers of calculus, extremely intelligent individual. The principle of sufficient reason is a way to express in words how reason operates. So, for example, reason operates in such a way where you say that for everything that exists, there must be a sufficient reason for why it is thus and not otherwise. That's the principle of sufficient reason. For everything that exists, there must be a sufficient reason for why it is thus and not otherwise. If that sounds kind of confusing, to put it in more easy to understand language, it basically says this: for everything that there is, you must be able to give an explanation for it, where that explanation you gave also has an explanation for itself. It's a little more nuanced than this because you have to get into what sufficiency is. But in a nutshell, that's essentially the spirit of what it means. That for everything that exists, there has to be an explanation for why it is that way. And the explanation you give also has to have an explanation. So you can't just say a fairy waved its wand and that's why that apple exists. Well, you have to say, well, what's the explanation for the fairy and how does the wand waving work? Like you can say that the fairy is an explanation for the apple, but if you do so, you have to be able to explain that fairy and how it waves its wand. So you see what essentially it means is that the idea of miracles is not possible. So the principle of sufficient reason is an extremely powerful principle and is at the heart of Hyperianism because it describes in words how reason operates. This is the structure of reason and how it operates. Critical and very important. So, reading here, again, another excerpt. we may assume that Anaximander somehow had to defend his bold theory of the free-floating, unsupported Earth against the obvious question of why the Earth does not fall. Aristotle's version of Anaximander's argument runs like this. But there are some who say that it, the Earth, stays where it is because of equality, such as among the ancients Anaximander. For that which is situated in the center, and at equal distances from the extremes, has no inclination whatsoever to move up rather than down or sideways, and since it is impossible to move in opposite directions at the same time, it necessarily stays where it is. Many authors have pointed to the fact that this is the first known example of an argument that is based on the principle of sufficient reason. The principle that for everything which occurs, there is a reason or explanation for why it occurs, and why this way rather than that. So again, you see it's a really powerful argument that Aristotle was elucidating. Whereas, you know, if the universe, basically the argument goes, if the world is moving, or not moving, but if the universe is, I keep saying universe, why the Earth doesn't fall, right? How can the Earth just be situated where it is and not fall? Well, the argument is by using the principle of sufficient reason, by saying, well, if the Earth is at the exact center, there is no reason why it would move up or down or left or right. There is no reason for it. If the Earth is at the very exact dead center of everything, why would it just suddenly and randomly move to the right for no reason, or suddenly and randomly move down for no reason, or suddenly and randomly move left for no reason? Well, there wouldn't be any reason for it to do that, because it would violate the principle of sufficient reason, which means, you know, you can't just have something suddenly go, I'm going to move left, or I'm going to move right. It doesn't work that way. You have to have a reason for what. Maybe something pushed it, or gravity affected it. But back then, of course, they weren't thinking in those terms. They had a much more primitive idea. Of course, we know now that this is not true. We know that the Earth is not the center of the universe. We know of things like gravity. We know all these extra things. But you see, back then, that was the argument that was used because they didn't know of these other factors. And Leibniz, you know, sort of call him the father of the principle of sufficient reason, knew that, yeah, there are some things that we don't know what the reason is for them, but there must be a reason. So even if you don't know what the reason is for something, there must be a reason, even if we don't know it. We can speculate about what it might be, etc. But it does exist nonetheless. It must. So again, very important. Anaximander, highly intelligent. And remember, this is one of the first philosophers ever. Student of Thales, the first philosopher. To get all of this is divine. So, you know, we should have, it's ridiculous that, you know, we have religions where, say, Jesus Christ is venerated, or, well, Jesus said, you know, treat others like you would treat yourself. Yeah, fine, that's great. Duh. And Christ gets a whole religion centered around him. Whereas Anaximander is like, oh, by the way, the Apeiron, the infinite, singularities, the principle of sufficient reason, evolution. No one's heard about this guy. You see how this world is so misguided in where it places its adoration. And so finally we get to the idea of other worlds. So again, reading from the excerpt here, the notion of the infinite with the modern meaning of the term, which was first introduced by the Greek philosopher Anaximander, Anaximander introduced the Apeiron, the boundless, as the beginning of everything, the first principle. According to his theory, the Apeiron is undefined and ever-moving. It gives birth to the contradictory terms of warm and cold and of moist and dry. You see, again, trying to use terms that we don't He was trying to encapsulate this idea of there is this thing that contains all opposites within it. In Hyperianism, that is 0, because 0 contains all possible mathematical values that are perfectly balanced. I just want to emphasize that the intelligence of it is divine. So literally it is divine if we think of what divinity truly is, in that it is reason expressing itself. Reason was expressing itself through Anaximander. It is divine. It's true divinity, not the false divinity of these bullshit religions of the world. This is true divinity. Reason expressing itself and understanding itself through itself. That is what divinity is. So, humanity is able to comprehend the result of this eternal process from the vast plurality of things and the infinite number of universes. The cosmological aspect in Anaximander's theory is beautiful. Innumerable worlds are born from the Apeiron and absorbed by it once they are destroyed. Again, now you have things being birthed from a singularity and then being returned to a singularity. You had the prototypical ideas of the Big Bang and the Big Crunch thousands of years before science would even hint at these ideas. Again, divine. So one thing I want to emphasize, that it is not clear whether Anaximander in his Innumerable Worlds, it's not clear whether he meant that these many worlds all coexisted at the same time, or if they succeeded each other. For example, you'd have one world and then it would be destroyed and another world would arise and it would be destroyed and then another. So we don't know. We don't know if he thought that there was a succession of worlds or if they all exist simultaneously. So that's one thing to understand. But here's this idea now that we want to put this all together, because these are all the pieces of the puzzle that we need to talk about. So we have Anaximander bringing forth the idea of evolution, bringing the idea of singularities, bringing the prototypical ideas for many worlds and space itself, and the Apeiron, the boundless, the origin of all things, and then everything working according to reason. So here's this idea. So what are aliens? Do aliens exist, etc.? Yes, aliens do exist. Now, extraterrestrials being life forms on other planets. Here's how this works. Planets are, and I'm sure many of you have heard me talk about this before, what planets are they are like seeds. So what planets, the purpose of a planet is to provide a environment in which monadic minds can localize, learn, understand, evolve, and grow. Now, do you see why we need all these different pieces to the puzzle? We need the idea of the Apeiron, the boundless. We need the idea of evolution. We need the idea of localized planetary systems emerging from a boundlessness. So in Hyperianism, this is the idea. We have a realm of mind. Every single one of us is an eternal mind known as a monad. Okay? And these are all particular minds that all originated from a universal. They themselves are a type of universals, but they are universals that have particular properties within themselves. And that particular property is their arrangement of their internal frequency data. This is what particularizes them and makes them discernible according to Leibniz's law, the identity of indiscernibles. So this is what particularizes monadic minds, is their particular properties that makes them unique from another monadic mind. So each and every single one of us is an eternal mind. Now, eternal minds will also then localize themselves. Well, what's the difference between what is locality and what is non-locality? The way to understand locality and non-locality is like a video game world and the code. The video game world is localized from in the game. From in the game, there are distances and separation. It depends upon location is a good way to think about it. It's location dependent. Oh, there is a tree 5 feet away from me. There is a bird 20 feet above me. Things are dependent on location. The code is not location dependent. The code all exists at once, and it's all doing its coding, running its programs in the background. You don't have to walk 5 feet over to reach a certain part of the code. So same thing, monadic minds, even though they are particulars, exist in the non-local domain of mind. the physical world is a world of locality. There are distances, there is separation. So monadic minds can localize themselves by linking to a body, an avatar, in the domain of spacetime. So now a mind that is a non-local entity has associated itself with a body and can now experience existence in a localized way. You see how this is all reality experiencing its many forms through itself. You have the one universal that experiences itself through particularity, through the various monadic minds, and then these various monadic minds are experiencing the world through locality. So you see how there's division upon division for this reality to experience itself through its own multiplicity, through its various transformations. Another way to think about it is sort of like, imagine that if you were the code of the video game. That's what you are. Imagine that you are the code. Well, if you want to experience the world, the video game world, you have to, as the code, put yourself into the viewpoint of one of the game characters, one of the avatar characters. So the game is what you are. It's a manifestation of you. It's the code. But if you want to experience it in that particular localized way, you're going to have to insert yourself as one of the game characters. All right, so what planets are is it provides an environment to produce vehicles, avatars, capable of sustaining a monadic link so that monadic minds are able to experience the realm of locality, physicality. So that is what a planet is. The purpose of a planet is for the development of monadic minds, because monadic minds then link to avatars in this environment. They're able to learn, grow, understand, because remember that monadic minds exist first in an unconscious state, in a very primitive state, because their internal frequency patterns have only varied just enough, let's say, to give themselves particularization. They have not formed complex structures. For example, self-awareness is a very complex structure. A monadic mind has not generated a sufficiently complex structure for self-awareness. It needs to be able to have an avatar to be able to grow, learn, explore, to be able to start to form the structures within itself and within its mind. So this is a planet. It creates a necessary environment for a monadic mind to link to, because evolution is now one of the driving forces here. And again, remember, people always ask, well, why would you incarnate on Earth? Because the incarnation process is how a monadic mind begins to form more complex structures within itself. Because it doesn't start off like that. It starts off in a very primitive state, an unconscious state. It only has enough variance to be a particular entity. It needs to increase its complexity and variance to really begin to develop these complex structures, to be able to have self-awareness, to be able to have all these higher modes of thinking. In Hyperianism, we go well beyond self-awareness to absolute awareness, monadic awareness, and then finally we achieve hyper-awareness. But we won't get into that today. But so this is the purpose of the planet. So do you see how we're already using all these different ideas? We're having the ideas of the mental reality. We're having the idea of planets. We're having the idea of evolution and how it's all tied and linked together. You have to see how all these things form and come together. So you have these planets that are provided environments. They're incubators sort of for monadic minds. So they incarnate onto planets through avatars. They've localized themselves. They learn, they grow, they evolve. Okay, now let's keep that in mind. Now, so these are planet. This is what a planet is for. Now, this does not mean that every single planet is going to be capable of doing this. You have to have the right initial conditions. So planets are like seeds in a certain way. So imagine if you take seeds and you throw a bunch of seeds and scatter them around. Some seeds will land on the dirt, and that will be the necessary right initial conditions for that seed to be able to grow and blossom into a plant. Other seeds will fall onto the pavement, and they won't be able to. A seed needs just the right initial conditions, and conditions in general. You need to be in the dirt. You need to have the right amount of moisture. You need to have the right amount of nutrients. You need to have the right amount of light. Very, very, very dependent on these things. So even though you might have a bunch of seeds that are scattered, only a couple of them may produce plants, depending on where they are sown. Same thing with planets. Planets are very, very dependent on these initial conditions. How far they are away from a sun, how many stars there are, it's not too close, not too far, gravity, being able to have a stable atmosphere. All these different things are necessary conditions to support avatars to be able to eventually form a monadic link and localize minds. So you're going to have tons and tons and tons and tons of planets that don't have life on them because they didn't have the correct initial conditions to support life and ultimately a link. So yes, extraterrestrials, alien life forms, do indeed exist, because this is what the purpose of a planet is. It's to localize and provide an environment for monadic minds, and would be very, 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 very silly to think that Earth was the only one capable of doing so. That's quite naive thinking to think so. If you think about the vast expanse of the universe and how tiny, the tiny place that we are, it is impossible to think that there is no, of course there is of course another planet is going to have the right initial conditions to support life. Now that might be light years and light years and light years and light years and light years away. It's not going to be next door. But yes, it is possible. Aliens do exist, just as we exist. But there's more to it than that, because you have this idea of evolving life forms. And so a planet's purpose exists more than to simply provide a link. What ends up happening as well is that you have multiple monadic minds now existing within this world on Earth. They begin to form societies. They begin to form cultures. And so what is this? This is monadic minds learning how to form a network. Because at first, really, it's a very individualistic thing. You just have monadic minds all out for themselves. Certain animals that are independent. Not even pack animals or like that. But you can think of some organisms that are, very independent. So at that point, you just have avatars that are simply localizing minds. But as evolution continues, they start to form networks in the forms of society, cultures. This starts off as tribes, tribal groups. But you see this becomes more and more and more sophisticated. So you start to project and think about this more. We have become more sophisticated in certain ways, more or less, with regard to society and cultural structures. We started off as tribes. It's evolved. It's gotten more sophisticated. Well, think about it. It's going to get more and more and more sophisticated. The network is going to become more and more symmetrical, more attuned, more in harmony. We will begin to work together more and more. We will do so in such a way where we're not killing each other, where we can, and this is the goal of Hyperianism and New Terra, to establish a new world, which we call New Terra, in which we create this society based on reason, based on compassion, based on teleology, based on dialectics, where we create this world where everything is beginning to harmonize and unify. So this network begins to get more and more sophisticated. Eventually, the network starts to become aware of itself as a network. And guess what? That's happening right now. Through these words that I'm saying, and you understanding them, and you becoming aware of the network, that's the network becoming aware of itself. Congratulations, you are stepping into a higher consciousness. I say that kind of funnily, in kind of a lighthearted way, but it's true. And you should be excited about this. It's very cool. You are going beyond self-awareness. You are becoming aware of the network, of the whole, of the totality, at least with regard to the subgroup, the subnetwork that is the Earth network, or the Terran network. When we build New Terra, we will have the Terran network that is a subnetwork of the network that is the entirety of the all, the absolute. So anyway, what happens then is you have these networks that are being formed, and this networks become more and more harmonized. The network becomes aware of itself as a network, and so we start to work together, symmetrical, as a group, in unison, instead of working in a divided way and fighting each other and killing each other because we disagree about whose sky daddy is the most powerful, or, you know, because some asshole billionaire wants to fly through space instead of feeding people that are dying, right? So you see, we begin to work in harmony and in unison as a network. Eventually, and again, this is the Hyperion goal, the network starts to become conscious of itself. And then through the development of network consciousness, the development of evolution, and the development of technology, and the development of knowledge, and being able to work through all this, what will happen is that we eventually will be able to form this network and create our own frequency channel. So what this means is that we, in essence, will be able to create our own shared dream world. In essence, we will be creating a truly a new Earth, in that it's no longer even physical. We will create a new universe that is composed of the energy components of us as minds working together. Now we will have evolved past being physical entities, but we will still have gained the ability to localize, because we will be able to localize in the environment, in the shared dream space that we have created. So words start to fail here, because in a sense we are physical but not physical at the same time. We are physical in that we are able to localize into that shared dream reality, but it's not localized into the universe, the holos, not the objective world that we all, not this particular holos. We'll create a different frequency channel, a shared dream that is composed of the energy contents of us as the network that has gone through this process of harmonization together. So planets are this monadic synchronization function. They have monads that link to avatars that localize themselves, and then through being on this planet, you have to learn to work together or you're gonna fucking die, right? As this planet is realizing. If you don't work together, your species will end. This will be like a plant that's starting to sprout and grow, and then it dies. So you have these minds that localize on Earth. This is a limited, confined space. So guess what? You are forced to learn to work together. So not only are planets as a localization environment for monadic minds, but it's also a synchronization environment as well. They have localized onto a limited space where they must learn to work together or else they will die. So now, through the synchronization process, if humanity does indeed, as Hyperianism is striving to actualize and catalyze this process, and we have already begun right now and right here through those watching this, you understanding and gaining conscious of this process. This is the network becoming conscious of itself. And when the network becomes conscious of itself, it can begin to organize itself better for its goal, for its telos, for its striving. So you can see how when the synchronization process happens, when we're all working together, we will progress extremely quickly in knowledge, in consciousness, in evolution, in technology. Extremely rapidly. I mean, look how fast we're going now when humanity is basically insane, half insane as it kills each other. Once we start working together and in harmony, our evolution, technology, consciousness, etc. is going to skyrocket. Through all this development, we will then be able to evolve into this network where we will no longer depend on the Holos Earth. We will have established our own new Terran network that is independent of that localized Earth, and we will be able to generate our own shared frequency channel. So to put it in a real succinct way and sort of brutish way, I mean, it's not brutish, it's true, but we will have evolved past the point of being physical entities, and we will exist as mental entities. But we will still have gained, because we went through this whole process, the ability to consciously localize, and that we can consciously localize in the environment that we will create for ourselves as the gods of that new Terran network. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, just as we are on this path, this evolutionary path, so are all extraterrestrial entities that exist on other planets. So are they. And so you can imagine that they also are on this path of evolution. And the idea that I want to stress here is that many people think of aliens and extraterrestrials as being little blue men or lizard people or whatever. And sure, they might. But here's the idea, is once they reach a level of their evolution, they become mental entities that exist within a framework of a network mind. So the idea here to understand is that, yes, absolutely, aliens exist, and they have planetary existence, but at some point, they will evolve to a point where they will no longer depend on a planet for its existence, because they will have developed past the need for physicality, having gained the ability to localize in their own shared environment that they create for themselves. And then thus they will become mental entities that really exist in the realm of mind that can form their own shared network. So the idea of thinking of aliens as little green men and whatnot, yeah, sure, maybe. But also, do you see how that's looking at a very small piece in the evolutionary scale? And I suppose what I'm trying to, why this is really important is because humanity has this very narrow view and skewed view. They only look at things in terms of, they imagine aliens as being, oh, these really technologically advanced creatures. And yeah, I mean, sure, I'm sure that they are. There are some that are like that. But there are also some that just have evolved into being non-physical network minds that are able to produce their own shared environment and exist also within a frequency domain as well. So they can exist within the frequency domain, project a shared space-time environment, all these things that they're able to do. It's really important not just anthropomorphizing things and thinking in that way. Just for example, when humanity was really, really in a extremely religious age, I mean, we still are an extremely religious age, but when more so, instead of thinking of aliens, they thought of angels. Well, now that science is kind of replacing religion, they think of these super beings as being super technologically advanced. And yes, I'm sure that there are absolutely some that are super technologically advanced. But if you project even further than that and past that, it becomes to the point where now you're dealing in the realm of network minds and frequency domains and shared space-time environments, rather than this primitive idea of flying around and flying saucers and shooting laser beams. You see, that's a really primitive idea and primitive way. The actuality of it is much more interesting, much more grand, and much more superior. And so it's really interesting even to think about is, imagine that we could find, I mean, I'm doing more of a thought experiment now. Imagine that we came across a planet where this has happened. The really interesting thing to think about is that this planet could look completely abandoned. Imagine that there might be remnants of a civilization there, but other than that, it might look like a dead planet. Why? Because that planet has served its purpose. It has served as providing a place for monadic minds to localize and evolve into a network mind that no longer has to rely on that planet to be able to localize. It can then create its own shared dream reality, its own shared dream space. So do you see what I'm getting at here? Is you could arrive at this planet that seems like a dead planet, but the reason why it does is because the planet has served its purpose. It's no longer necessary. It has, just like imagine the seed that produces the plant, and then the husk of the seed is gone and thrown away. Like you just find that dead husk of a seed. That's what would be equivalent of finding this dead planet. It's not necessary. You know, you might find it and be like, oh man, this species must have died out because maybe their atmosphere became unbreathable, or maybe they had a war. And that's possible. Maybe that happened. But it's also possible that it was just unnecessary anymore. It served its purpose. It's now the husk of the seed that has now graduated. You see this, it's important to not get stuck in this very human mindset of where we are in space and time, and aliens are, oh, these green men flying in saucers and have laser guns. And I'm sure that there are species that are at a certain technological point where it would be like that. They're probably vastly, extremely far away. But you see where I'm getting at. There is such a more evolved and interesting way of looking at these things than simply how it's done. And, it's really laughable when you watch these documentaries, and it's like, ugh. It's just a very primitive way, a very primitive way of looking at it. Again, not that it couldn't be like that. It could. It's just such a tiny little slice and glimpse of a particular evolutionary moment in the growth of a species and a network. So, and I hope that you can see the reason why I called Anaximander the first alien philosopher is because you see how we use, he didn't talk about these things, but all the components that he put forth were necessary for being able to come to this conceptualization of having singularities, of having the Apeiron, of having planets, of having evolution. You can see where we needed all those necessary ingredients to be able to understand. Now we can understand this much better in terms of Hyperianism and ontological mathematics and all this. But it's just interesting to see that he was the first that sort of set the stage for what would eventually be able to bloom and become possible. And again, I really want you guys to get excited about this and not discount how the enormity of it, that if you are understanding the concept of the network mind properly and truly, that is the network becoming aware of itself. And this is why we say in Hyperianism, we are the next evolutionary step. Now, there are many different grades of evolution, and I'm going to put out at some point a very rigorous way to understand all these different levels, how to attain each one, etc. But there's many different ways. There's avatar consciousness, there's monadic consciousness, there's absolute consciousness. There are different grades of avatar self-aware consciousness depending on your level of interstar actualization. And mastery of all that ultimately culminates in hyper-awareness. But you can understand, like, absolute awareness is our word for, you could replace the word absolute awareness with network consciousness. In a certain way. It's a little, we could argue over trivialities, but to get at the core and essence of things, this is what it's about. It's about being aware of, and not just your own network, but the network. We are really a sub-network. As being monadic minds localized on Earth, we are forming a sub-network. There is the total network of the entire universe, of which we form various sub-networks. But again, get excited about this, because this is through me reflecting into you, and through this reflection becoming conscious of our totality. This is the network becoming conscious of itself through understanding this information. So it's extremely exciting. Now, it's important to understand the overall picture, but we don't want to get lost in that as well, because before we graduate to this, we have to fix the things that are happening in this world right now. Physically, we have very big real world problems. Kids are going hungry. The rich elite billionaires are destroying the world through their hoarding of wealth. We live in a flawed system that's easily manipulated and makes sure that con men and cheaters get to the top rather than compassionate, meritable, rational individuals. The political system is a mess. We have very real world problems that we need to fix so that we can finally set on that path to truly learn, grow together, and enjoy our existence and create our own world, our own reality. So that's what we want to do. That's what we do. In New Terra will begin as that unconquerable citadel as we create this world, and we go on this journey together as eternal minds, becoming more aware of themselves through originally being a universal, particularizing itself and then localizing itself, and then becoming conscious of itself through itself. And it's really exciting. And I hope you guys, the reason why I repeat it so much and really emphasize it is because we could be doing such interesting things together as a group once we achieve that consciousness. Just like when humanity first achieved self-awareness, it could start doing much more interesting things. It could start building more complex societies. It could start, creating innovations in technology. When we together form that network consciousness, in addition to our own self, we are not eliminating our self-awareness. We're keeping that. We need it. It's important. Nodal consciousness is important as well as network consciousness. You don't want to trade one for the other. Nodal consciousness works in harmony with network consciousness. So that's really important. And as we go forward to construct this new world and create this new world, we can have that idea in mind and know what we're doing as we construct real solutions to real problems. But again, get excited about this, because you are by understanding this material, finding this material. And if if you're not Hyperion, that's fine. But a lot of people who watch my stuff and get interested in this material are Hyperions. Be excited, because you are at the forefront of a wave of new consciousness. You are the network becoming conscious of itself. We are, both nodal and network consciousness at the same time. And it is a momentous turning point, a tipping point, a focal point, an inflection point in history. I want to give a big shout out to all the supporters on Patreon, especially Cassidy, Renaissance Fairy, and Jordy. Thank you so much, guys. Remember, anyone that supports on Patreon or tier 2 or higher on YouTube gets access to my lecture notes for this video, our hidden Discord server, and our secret weekly live streams, and a lot more. Remember, Patreon is the best way to support my work because of all the deplatforming and censorship on YouTube and Facebook. So this is how I'm able to do what I do. Patreon's the best way to help. And thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It means the world to me. Thank you.